Well, let's take you live now to an event being held by the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation. It's the Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum. It began today, concludes on Sunday.
Our historical context reveals patterns of power and control, invisible forces, and ancient knowledge systems. With this in mind, let us be guided by history in our approach. From this vantage point, we notice how all nations are susceptible to crisis, political, economic, health, social, and natural catastrophes, multifaceted crises that have engulfed humanity since the misty beginnings of time. Sadly, as history will tell, whether during times of relative certainty or during times of global crisis, it is mainly the poorest people who are left behind. The salvation of the vulnerable and marginalized can at best be addressed under the servant leadership. Leadership capable of leading from the front and leading from behind. The late Professor Kgalema Motlanthe interpretation of Professor Njabulo Ndebele's inaugural King Moshweshwe Memorial Lecture at the University of Free State on the 25th of May 2006, entitled Leadership Challenges Truth and Integrity in an Act of Salesmanship, reads in part as follows, and I quote, "Examining the quality of leadership necessary in the present context in a very complex society in which the complexity of governance has constitutionally been put in place, Ndebele argues that its effective form is realized when it is in compliance with the will of the citizens in a counterintuitive manner. By counterintuitive, Ndebele means the leadership that is open to other alternatives other than those prescribed by the force of circumstances. He finds this exemplified in Moshweshwe's relationship with Mzilikazi in the 19th century and by Nelson Mandela in the relationship with white South Africans in our time. The true nature of this leadership is its ability to recognize the legitimacy of an alternative leadership that emerges to contest and democratically replace the present one, which is hegemonic and dominant. In other words, true leadership must be able to vision an alternative leadership to the one that is only capable of practicing and facilitating. This is what the present political leadership of the African National Congress is incapable of envisioning, an alternative and oppositional leadership that legitimately goes beyond the one the dominant leadership is capable of doing and achieving. The practice of democracy is predicated on envisioning an alternative other beyond one's ability. This is the conundrum of the present crisis in South Africa." Close quote. The moral of what Professor Kgalema Motlanthe and Professor Njabulo Ndebele are pointing out or pointing at is that the task of political radicals is to get to the point where they become no longer necessary because their goals would have been accomplished. And as I conclude, history, the teacher, tests our ability to explore each other's points of views, beliefs, findings, and solutions. Our strongest tool to discover how to steer the nation on a trajectory of recovery and cohesion and interact harmoniously with the ecosystem is born from the virtues of dialogue. The time for ideas and the time for exchange has never been more pressing for the survival of democracy and humanity than it is now. All markers point to a precipice, and from here, on the edge of the Drakensberg Mountains, we may observe how far the cliff edge falls for all. This forum is an urgent invitation to all sectors of society to respond to the situation they find themselves in. Allow this forum to be an engine of ideas that drives those who have the power to implement and inspire those of influence to rethink pathways to economic growth, to take stock and move this country and the continent forward. And I thank you for your kind attention.
That was just a snippet of what's going on at the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation's Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum. Some scathing words there from the former president against the leadership of the ANC in its current form, and talking about the need for intuitive thinking. We'll bring you some more of the highlights of that gathering as they come to hand.